Okay, so last week let me move this so I can see everything at once. Last week we were talking about the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, and so we left it at, there we go. So we left it at, we saw, and that's this first source on the page. We left it with this idea that first source of Mikdash Sheni Shayu Uskin B'Torah of Mitzvot Miluchasadim B'Pnei Macharav. The time of the Second Temple period, they were engaged in Torah study, observance of mitzvot, acts of kindness. They were ostensibly decent people. They weren't perfect. No one's perfect, but they were pretty good. Right? So they didn't have these cardinal sins that the Gemara attributed to the destruction of the first temple. They were decent people. So why was the temple destroyed? And so the Gemara there in Masechet Yoma says it was destroyed. The second temple was destroyed because there was sinat chinam. So the way Steinsaltz in there, his English translation translates wanton hatred. Sina would be hatred, chinam would be free. It's often translated as baseless hatred, free hatred, meaning there was no, well, we'll see exactly what that means. But probably a simple pshat explanation of sinat chinam would be hatred for nothing, meaning hatred over nothing. So I want to explore exactly what that concept means. What does that mean, baseless hatred? If that was indeed the reason that the second temple was destroyed, and we're still living in this time where the second temple has not been rebuilt, that means that on some level we must also be guilty of it. I didn't include this in the source sheet, but there's a rabbinic tradition that basically any generation in which the temple wasn't destroyed, it wasn't rebuilt, it's as if they were the generation that destroyed it, because that means they still have the problems. As soon as the problem disappears, the temple will return. And that's this idea that the rabbis have. So if that's true, then we are still guilty of this sinat chinam, and so it's appropriate for us to try to figure out, so what exactly is this sinat chinam? What is it that we're doing that is still preventing the divine presence in this world? That's what I want to focus on today. There's one very, very long story in Masechet, in the Talmud, found in Masechet Gittin. Parenthetically, there's something sort of interesting. The stories of the giving of the Torah in the Talmud. So the story, if people have heard about this thing where the Israelites stood around the mountain and God sort of hung the mountain over their heads. This is rabbinic tradition that how the Israelites received the Torah. So that story is found in Masechet Kiddushin. This story that we're going to read, it's going to talk a lot about the destruction of the temple, is found in Masechet Gittin. For people who know anything about even some of the basics of interpersonal law, laws of marriage, the laws of marriage are found in Masechet Kiddushin, which is where the stories of the giving of the Torah are found. And Gittin is the story, is the get, is the process of a divorce. And that's where the stories of the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash are told, which is sort of like this interesting thing when the rabbis were trying to find where stories were going to fit in the Talmud. There's something really powerful about, I mean, the idea, the prophets in the Bible already used this, presented the relationship between God and the people as being like a relationship between a man and a woman. So it's interesting that they here choose to do that as well. But that's a whole separate conversation about the placement of these stories in the Talmud. But it's just interesting to note that this destruction of the temple is going to be here in Masechet Gittin. So it's a long story, as I said. I'm giving parts of it. I have I think 5 parts to this story here. What I want to do first is just read the story without jumping into the specifics, into analysis of it. I want to read the entire story, all 5 parts, and then I want to go back and sort of talk about what this story means about Sinat Chinam, what all these parts together mean about Sinat Chinam. So we'll start here with source number 2 from Masechet Gittin. The whole story spans between 55b and 56a and 56b. So I just give the whole thing here. I'm going to start this with the koteret, like the header is source number 2 here. Will someone read for us just the first source? I'm sorry, the second source number 2, just that one little paragraph.
Okay, I'll do it.
Thanks.
Rabbi Yochanan said, what is the meaning of who fears always, but he who hardens his heart shall fall into mischief? Jerusalem was destroyed on account of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa.
Okay, so that statement from Rabbi Yochanan we're going to come back to, but he seems to ask this question. I don't know if it's rhetorical or not, but what is the meaning of this verse? Happy is the man who fears always, but he who hardens his heart shall fall into mischief. And then it seems that the answer is the following: Jerusalem was destroyed on account of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. So to get to this story, I guess these series of stories are going to somehow relate to what Rabbi Yochanan says. We'll come back to that at the end. But so now part number 1. So here's the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. Someone want to, Mark Saper, if you want, you can continue, or we can pass it to someone else. Okay.
Part 1. The Gemara explains, Jerusalem was destroyed on account of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. This is as there was a certain man whose friend was named Kamsa and whose enemy was named Bar Kamsa. He once made a large feast and said to his servant, go bring me my friend Kamsa. The servant went and mistakenly brought him his enemy, Bar Kamsa.
Understandable mistake. They have almost the same name. One's Kamsa, one's Bar Kamsa. Servant makes a mistake, invites the wrong person. Should have invited Kamsa, he invites Bar Kamsa. But Bar Kamsa shows up. So what happens here? Mark, Mark Saper, you can just finish the whole part.
Okay. The man who was hosting the feast came and found Bar Kamsa sitting at the feast. The host said to Bar Kamsa, that man is the enemy of that man. That is, you are my enemy. What then do you want here? Arise and leave. Bar Kamsa said to him, since I have already come, let me stay and I will give you money for whatever I eat and drink. Just do not embarrass me by sending me out.
Right. So he says, okay, look, maybe I shouldn't have come, but I'm here. I'll pay for my meal. It's not going to cost you anything. Just don't embarrass me. Let me stay. Keep going.
The host said to him, no, you must leave. Bar Kamsa said to him, I will give you money for half of the feast. Just do not send me away. The host said to him, no, you must leave. Bar Kamsa then said to him, I will give you money for the entire feast. Just let me stay. The host said to him, no, you must leave. Finally, the host took Bar Kamsa by his hand, stood him up, and took him out.
Okay, not a pretty episode at this feast. We don't know exactly why this party was happening, but there was some that reason the host, whose name is not identified, which is sort of interesting. The story is called the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, but Kamsa's not even here. It's the host and Bar Kamsa who are having this interaction, which is a separate idea that I'm not really sure what to make of right now. But okay, he throws him out. He has to lift him up and throws him out.
Okay.
Finish it up.
After having been cast out from the feast, Bar Kamsa said to himself, since the sages were sitting there and did not protest the actions of the host, although they saw how he humiliated me, learn from it that they were content with what he did. I will therefore go and inform against them to the king. Okay.
Thoughts on this story? Anyone? Reactions? Was Kamsa? I'm sorry, not Kamsa. Was Did Bar Kamsa overreact? Is he overreacting here at the end? Is the host overreacting here? What are people's immediate thoughts on reading this story and thinking about, if you were in this situation, would you have behaved similarly? I mean, we'd all like to believe you would have behaved differently, right? But any reactions to this immediately?
The host was terrible.
The host is terrible. Why? Say more. Why? Why? You didn't invite this guy. The guy crashed his party. Why is he here?
Yeah, I know, but I mean, I guess for the sake of I mean, I think he had to listen to what the guy was saying. The guy was trying to save his face, and the guy could have been a little understanding about it.
I mean, a feast like this, I mean, big banquets are typically expensive.
You're right.
Here he is saying, I'll pay for the whole thing. Just let me stay. You know,
You're right.
any rational person would be like, great, you fit the bill, and then I'll just, fine, you can stay. Just don't talk to anyone.
No, people show up at parties all the time that you don't want, that you didn't invite. I mean,
yeah.
And you don't embarrass people like that.
Any thoughts on these? On when is Bar Kamsa, his reaction when he says the sages were sitting there, they didn't protest? That means that they were consenting. Do people feel like that rings true, or that's an accurate depiction of what happened? And or if it is, is the result saying therefore I'm going to inform against them to the king? Is that a fair response?
Well, they were standing idly by, and they say that embarrassment is akin to murder. So yeah, the sages were responsible.
Okay.
What I don't understand is it's the host who's apparently has animosity towards Bar Kamsa, but nowhere in the story does it say that the host was an enemy of Bar Kamsa.
What do you
The
mean?
host is obviously a friend of Kamsa, but
Yeah.
the host is not necessarily an enemy of Bar Kamsa. It doesn't say that anywhere.
It's in that first paragraph. It does. He has a Baal Devave Bar Kamsa. He is.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know the proper translation. Baal Devave. Steinsaltz translated as enemy named Bar Kamsa. So they do think that there was some history between the host and Bar Kamsa that.
Okay.
but evidently Bar Kamsa didn't feel as bad about it.
Right. Yeah. He showed up. He showed up at the event. So
he, at the very least, he was willing to give the host the benefit of the doubt.
Right. And I'm sure that with names so similar, I'm sure that this mistake is not uncommon, right? Like how, I mean, they have, there must be other times that this similar mistake has happened. They're probably used to getting mixed up. It's not so.
They get each other's mail.
Right. I mean, they did here. They got each other's mail here, so presumably not the first time. Okay, so I want to look at source number 3. This story appears in Masachet Gittin, but it also appears in Eicha Rabbah, Midrashim on the Book of Lamentations. So the story appears, at least this part of the story also appears in Eicha Rabbah in source number 3. Similar, but also different. Does someone want to read for us source number 3? What happens here? How it's described here.
I'll read it.
Thanks, Charles.
There was once a man in Jerusalem who made a feast. He said to one in his household, "Go and bring Kamsa, my friend." He went and brought Bar Kamsa, his enemy. He came and sat down among the guests. He saw him among the guests and said to him, "You are my enemy, and you sit in my house. Get up and leave my house." He replied to him, "Do not embarrass me. I will pay the cost of the meal." He said to him, "You may not eat here." He said to him, "Do not embarrass me. I will just sit and not eat or drink." He said to him, "You may not eat here." He said to him, "Do not embarrass me. I will pay for the entire meal." He said to him, "Go." Rabbi Zechariah ben Avikolos, and it was in his hand to stop it, and he did not stop it.
Right, so the story is largely the same. There's some differences as to what he was saying he would pay for, what he would do, but it's largely the same story. The difference here at the very end, we have identified this rabbi who was there. Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkolas was there. It wasn't just the rabbis in general. Apparently there was a specific rabbi who was there, who maybe he was fairly close with the rabbis, or I'm sorry, with the host. It was in his power to sort of say, let's just calm down here. Let him just say. Apparently he had the ability to do something, Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkolas, and he didn't do anything. and because of he didn't do anything. It seems like that's what Bar Kamsa was upset about, not about the rabbis in general, but about this particular rabbi, that he should have known better. He should have stepped in, and he didn't. And that seems to be what upset Rabbi. That's what upset Bar Kamsa. And the end is the same. Then he decides he's going to go and inform against them to the king. Any thoughts on this read? Does this change things? The fact that it was just one rabbi who failed to behave appropriately, do people feel like that now changes Rabbi Bar Kamsa's reaction? That maybe Bar Kamsa really should have been upset with Rabbi Zechariah. Maybe he should have done something and said something to Rabbi Zechariah and not necessarily against all the Jews or to the emperor of Rome. Mark Bernstein, is that intentional hand raise?
Yes, sorry.
Okay, no, it's okay.
I was just going to say, one of the things I just was noticing was that how brief the source from Zagitin is in the Aramaic versus the Eicha Rabbah version, and also the interpolations that I guess Steinsaltz makes there, which seem to be based totally on the Eicha Rabbah. So he's reading it through the prism of the Eicha Rabbah, which is interpolating all sorts of things that aren't there literally, which makes sense, but the fact that he says, you don't embarrass me, that's not in the text, which is in the text in Eicha Rabbah, which spells it out. So I just thought that was interesting to point out.
Yeah, I don't know. I could pull up. My guess would be that Steinsaltz oftentimes will follow Rashi's interpretation on the Gemara. So it could be that Rashi adds that in, and then Rashi knew that from Eicha Rabbah. I'd have to check that. But yeah, that's interesting. The story in Gittin also runs for longer, and this statement in Eicha Rabbah is really only this. It doesn't include parts 2 and 3.
Well, and as you said, I think introducing Rabbi Zechariah ben Kolas is, extending the story basically by saying, there was a third person there who could have done something to stop it and didn't. So it's not just the two antagonists, it's this seemingly neutral, and actually it's funny, I just quoted this, it's not from Gittin, it's from Yevamot, I think, where, what does it go, Shtika, Kahodaya, Ken, right, the same thing, it's that the person who keeps silent is acquiescent, basically, is responsible.
Right. Yeah, I think it's probably in Yevamot, it's getting Gittin, it's like all over the place as a general principle and for halacha. Shtika kahoda. Yeah, that's a really good point. That he's saying, like, look, you said nothing. He could have said something. That means that you're agreeing with this, and that's unacceptable. Any other thoughts on this part 1 before we go to the sequel part 2 to see exactly what Bar Kamsa does with this information in the aftermath of this embarrassing experience that he has?
Bar Kamsa is not a nice guy.
Who is? Who?
Bar Kamsa is not a nice guy.
Why do you say that?
Because of, that he decides to go and denounce at least the rabbis because of this one incident that,
Is it any wonder that the host didn't want him at his
party? Pardon?
Is it any wonder that the host didn't want him at his party? Like, well,
right.
You're going to see something, you're going to do something, and it's going to be terrible. Just get out. I don't want you here because you have this reputation of like flipping out at things. I don't know. It's interesting. Well, keep that in mind. But that's interesting.
Also interesting the fact that one rabbi is named in the second story. There's something there. I'm not sure what to do with it. But that's a lot of responsibility to put on that one rabbi, because if this rabbi didn't speak up, Jerusalem was destroyed.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, to be that rabbi would be.
Right. Yeah, that's a lot of weight that they're putting on him, and almost like exclusively on him. Like this is his fault.
Right.
Which is probably also always attractive. I think when you're looking at some catastrophe, you want to be able to point to something and say that's why it was that specific. I mean, the whole idea, it was Kamsa and Bar Kamsa that it happened. So that it's sort of more comforting to be able to say, we can now avoid it, because I mean, this is how people, when they have experiences in crises, people will oftentimes try to point to things, whether it's rational or not, because it gives some sense of control, to say like, oh, because of this comment, because of this, everything's spelled out. Well, there are probably thousands of other factors that were at play here, but it's comforting to be able to point to something specific, so that we can feel like we understand, and we can control, and we can predict, and we can prevent in the future. But yeah, it's we'll come back to that idea for sure. Okay, part number 2, the sequel so far. Anyone want to read part 2 for us?
Which is that source number? Which one? I'm sorry. The
Source number 4.
source number 4.
The middle of page 2. Only the first page is numbered, but middle of page 2.
Starts with.
He went to the emperor.
Oh, he went. Okay, I can do it if you want.
Please.
He went and said to the emperor, that one?
Yep.
He went and said to the emperor, "The Jews have rebelled against you." The emperor said to him, "Who says that this is the case?" Bar Kamsa said to him, "Go and test them. Send them an offering to be brought in honor of the government, and see whether they will sacrifice it."
Keep going.
Oh, okay. The emperor went and sent with him a choice 3-year-old calf. While Bar Kamsa was coming with the calf to the temple, he made a blemish on the calf's upper lip. And some say he made the blemish on its eyelids, a place where, according to us, that is the halacha, it is a blemish. But according to them, the Gentile rules for their offerings, it is not a blemish. Therefore, when Bar Kamsa brought the animal to the temple, the priests would not sacrifice it on the altar, since it was blemished. But they also could not explain this satisfactorily to the Gentile authorities, who did not consider it to be blemished.
Right. So he knows the system of the Roman sacrifices well enough to know that what they would consider a blemish and not. He knows Jewish law well enough to know what they would consider a blemish or not. So he does it in such a way that he told the Romans, look, they're not going to accept your offering. And then he rigs the situation so that they wouldn't bring the offering. And they're not really able to have a meaningful conversation about it, because the Romans say it's a good offering. The Jews say it's not a good offering, and they're not really able to communicate as to why it's not a good offering.
Jared, here he is Rabbi Zechariah?
No. Here it's Bar Kamsa. Rabbi Zechariah is not in the picture yet. In the third paragraph, he's gonna come into play. Here, read the third section now. The blemish notwithstanding. The
blemish notwithstanding, the sages thought to sacrifice the animal as an offering due to the imperative to maintain peace with the government. Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkolas said to them, "If the priests do that, people will say that blemished animals may be sacrificed as offerings on the altar." The sages said, "If we do not sacrifice it, then we must prevent Bar Kamsa from reporting this to the emperor." The sages thought to kill him so that he would not go and speak against them. Rabbi Zechariah said to them, "If you kill him, people will say that one who makes a blemish on sacrificial animals is to be killed." As a result, they did nothing. Bar Kamsa's slander was accepted by the authorities, and consequently, the war between the Jews and Romans began.
And to finish up the next.
Rabbi Yochanan says, "The humility of Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkolas destroyed our temple, burned our sanctuary, and exiled us from our land."
So it's interesting. So here's Rabbi Zechariah again. In the story in Eicha, he was there at the party. The story in Gittin, he wasn't at the party. He was among the rabbis of the Beit HaMikdash who were now discussing. But he seems to be, and both of them, they're sort of blaming him. It's sort of his fault in either the eyes of Bar Kamsa at the party or in the eyes of Rabbi Yochanan at the very end of that little piece in part 2, saying that he should have said something. Or so according to Eicha Rabbah, he failed to say something. According to Gittin, he introduced an idea that shouldn't have been accepted. But either way, he seems to be a figure playing and being influential in both of these. And Rabbi Yochanan says something very strong here. It's not just about what he said, not what he said, but it's anvatanu to. It's his it's humility. I want to say like excessive humility that caused the destruction. And with that statement of Rabbi Yochanan, I think we can sort of like think back a little bit to Eicha, like, why does a rabbi, why did he not say anything at the time at the party? Was it because of this humility of him? Was it because he sort of felt, is it really my place to say anything right now? I shouldn't say anything. This is like, it's between Bar Kamsa and the host. Like, I shouldn't really get involved in this. Is that what's happening here? And why is Rabbi Yochanan here calling it here this excessive humility? Where's the humility here? I mean, how do we understand Rabbi Yochanan's challenge or charge against Rabbi Zachariah here?
I was going to question that too. How is this humility? It seems like he's focusing on the ritual law as opposed to the concept of, peace with the government. He's focusing on little aspects of the law as opposed to the big picture of peace and security.
Interesting. He's very narrow-minded in what he's focusing on, and not seeing the big picture here.
Yeah, so I'm not sure how that connects to humility.
Yeah. Anyone have any thoughts about how it connects?
Choice of word.
What's that?
Yeah, there's a strange choice of word for describing what he was doing. I mean,
I'm wondering if maybe if humility is sort of thinking. I'm trying to think about how to formulate this in a way that's coherent. But if humility is sort of saying, I'm not going to get involved in this. What do I know? I know so little. I don't want to get involved. Maybe you could make the argument that that's a little bit of, I don't want to get involved in the bigger thing. I can't think about the bigger issue here. Like, who am I? I'm nothing. I'm not going to get involved. Like, I wonder if you could sort of force it into being something like humility about I'm going to just focus on me. I'm not going to focus on the larger world. I'm not going to focus on the larger ideas. I don't know if there's something to sort of force it into being humility about being the more narrow-minded, not globally minded. But yeah, unless Rabbi Yochanan is sort of like, I don't know, part of me thinks, does Rabbi Yochanan know the story as it appears in Eicha Rabbah? And so that's what he's talking about. And then the Gemara in Gittin puts it in here. Why the Gemara would put it in here, I'm not sure, unless it's trying to link the two stories and say, look, there's a version here, there's a version there, but these are really the same story. Rabbi Zachariah really dropped the ball on this. I'm not sure. I don't have a good explanation as to what's going on with that.
yeah, but it's not. But I mean, in spite of it, it doesn't. I don't see why they would describe it as humility. I mean, it's. I mean, it's. It's being sort of a technocrat at the temple.
Okay. Give a little bit more. What do you mean?
Well, a technocrat in the sense that he's saying, well, let me just look at the actual interpretation of the law in this very, in this case, and not think about the overlying consequences that you have in the big picture that the other rabbis were trying to think about what they were going to do about the Romans, which was their big enemy. I mean, the Romans were probably just dying to destroy them anyway.
Excuse, yeah. Mark Bernstein.
I was just going to say, I think Charles is onto something. If I'm not mistaken, I think this was all taking place in just a few years before the actual destruction, right? It's in the 60s.
Yeah.
Place in the 60s.
We're going to lead right into it in part number 3. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I don't mean to jump in.
Yeah. No. Go ahead. Go, please.
But the other thing is, I think we might want to read it as his humility as being ironic, that he actually was not humble, and that in fact I think the real. Because how does the whole thing starts with that this is not sinat chinam. Remember, the source in Gittin is not like Eicha Rabbah, where it's sinat chinam that calls the destruction of the temple. It's the person who's not anxious for the consequences of his actions, and that's Zachariah here. He's sort of the bad guy in the story, really, if it comes down to it, because the others are engaged in some sort of petty fight, but he's the one who the temple is destroyed because of him, basically. So he's anything but humble. There's a certain, so I think it's meant ironically. He's not really a humble person. He might be very pious and outwardly pious, but he's not humble. He could have done something here to head it all off, and he didn't.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a really interesting thought and good thought. It's good. I want to read all the parts, and then we're gonna tie it all back together in a way that I think is gonna work out actually really, really nicely given where this conversation is going. So any other thoughts on this before we move on to part number 3, the Roman response? Okay, someone want to read for us then source number 5, which is part 3, which is two brief paragraphs.
I'll read it.
Thanks.
The Roman authorities then sent Nero Caesar against the Jews. When he came to Jerusalem, he wished to test his fate. He shot an arrow to the east, and an arrow came and fell in Jerusalem. Then he shot another arrow to the west, and it also fell in Jerusalem. He shot an arrow in all 4 directions of the heavens, and each time the arrow fell in Jerusalem. Nero then conducted another test. He said to a child, "Tell me a verse that you learned today." He said to him as follows, "And I will lay my vengeance upon Edom by the hand of my people Israel." Nero said, "The Holy One, blessed be he, wishes to destroy his temple, and he wishes to wipe his hands with that man, i.e., with me. The Romans are associated with Edom, the descendants of Esau. If I continue on this mission, I will eventually be punished for having served as God's agent to bring about the destruction." So he fled and became a convert, and ultimately Rabbi Meir descended from him.
Okay, so here's this Roman general who says, okay, I'm sent to destroy Jerusalem. He sees that I'm not going to say it's in the stars, it's in the wind, it's in whatever. Every time he shoots an arrow, it lands in Jerusalem. It's clear to him that this is what God wants. Then he also has the sense that, well, the result of this is that I'm going to be blamed for this. So I don't want to get involved in this. I'd rather not do anything. If I'm going to do God's will, I don't want to be blamed for having destroyed Jerusalem. I don't want to part in it. So he leaves. Apparently he converts. And Rabbi Meir, who's not a no-name rabbi, and a significant rabbi in Jewish history, he's a descendant of Nero.
Is this the Emperor Nero?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know enough about Roman history. I mean, this Nero, the general, gets replaced by Vespasian. I don't know how that works with Roman history. I'm sure this is something very easily discovered, but I don't know. It could be. I mean, it calls him Neron Caesar, Caesar, Nero Caesar. I guess, but I don't know. I don't even know. Like, was Nero considered a good emperor? Bad? Like, I don't know my Roman history at all.
Well, Nero was the guy that fiddled while Rome burned. He was like supposedly crazy.
I don't know. Any thoughts on part 3? Any thoughts about what this is? Like, we are now well beyond Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, right? Like, that story we seem to have. So we got Kamsa, we got Bar Kamsa, we got the host, we had Rabbi Zechariah, and now, like, we've moved on from there. But still, the Talmud feels it necessary. You could to add this story. This is part of the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. Is this story of the destruction where Nero has the opportunity and the responsibility to destroy Jerusalem, and he says, "I'm out. I'm not doing this. I don't want the punishment associated with this. I'm leaving." Any thoughts on this part 3 here? We'll come back to part 3. I think there's something very key happening in part 3, which we'll come back to at the end. Part number 4. So I'm skipping a little bit. Just because there are a lot of parts of the story, so I'm cutting up a chunk, but jumping to what I'm calling part 4. Nero is replaced by Vespasian, and Vespasian lays a siege against Jerusalem, cuts it off, and due to a variety of factors, there's a famine now in Jerusalem. And part number 4 is going to tell a particular story about a particular woman named Martha bat Baitus, Martha, the daughter of Baitus, who was a very wealthy woman, and her experience during this famine. Someone want to read for us part number 4, source number 6 in Gittin. One short, not short, but one paragraph here.
I can do it.
Thanks, Mark.
With regard, that one?
Yep.
with regard to this famine, it is related that Marta bat Baitos was one of the wealthy women of Jerusalem. She sent out her agent and said to him, "Go bring me fine flour, smidah." By the time he went, the fine flour was already sold. He came and said to her, "There was no fine flour, but there is ordinary flour." She said to him, "Go then and bring me ordinary flour." By the time he went, the ordinary flour was also sold. He came and said to her, "There is no ordinary flour, but there is coarse flour, gush keva." She said to him, "Go then and bring me coarse flour." By the time he went, the coarse flour was already sold. He came and said to her, "There is no coarse flour, but there is barley flour." She said to him, "Go then and bring me barley flour." But once again, by the time he went, the barley flour was also sold.
Right. So she ends up with no food, and the end of the story is that she starves to death. Right. So like we're chuckling. Mark Saper, why are you chuckling at this story?
It sounds like something was against her.
Right. Something was against her. Nothing could go right.
She should have told her agent to buy whatever he could at the beginning.
Right. You just said, "Look, my number one is the fine flour, but if there's no fine flour, don't get nothing, get other flour." Right?
It's really like shopping during this pandemic. You try to get flour after Pesach and there was just no way. And now, working with, people doing shopping for me is, like, okay, I have to say no substitutions because of kashrut, but there might be some other version that's still kosher that would be okay if they're out of this. It's really hitting home.
Right. Yeah. And Mark Bernstein, yeah.
Just a quick, so are we missing, is there a gap in the text here? In other words, it talks about a famine.
Yeah. So I skipped it because it was a longer section, but they lay siege. There's a whole, the people of Jerusalem don't know what to do. Some people, like the main rabbis, advocate sort of negotiating some sort of form of something. The zealots just tried to destroy all the stores of food in the hopes that doing so would force all the citizens of Jerusalem to fight back. As long as they have food, they're able to have negotiations and figure something out. But once they run out of food, they'll be forced to fight. And so the zealots destroy all the food in Jerusalem. That leads directly to this famine. I didn't include that because even though I think that it really ties nicely with where we're going, but it was going to take too long, and I thought this part captured it as well. But we can come back to talk about that story outside. But that's what we skipped. Yeah.
Sorry, the zealots are the ones who destroy the food?
Yeah. I think Abba Sikra, is the name of the leader of the zealots who wants to destroy, because he wants to encourage them to fight back. As long as there's food, no one's going to fight. So they want to encourage an all-out war against Rome. Yeah. Okay. So and then this narrative happens. Then there's more of a conversation between Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai at the end of. Well, actually, before any other comments on part 4 before we move to the fifth part 5. So there's after part 4 that goes back to the story, after talking specifically about Marta Baitus, it goes back to the general story. There's this, the zealots are not letting anyone in or out of Jerusalem unless they're willing to organize, and they're going to leave Jerusalem in order to fight against the Romans. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was the major religious leader of the time. He wants to go out and have an audience with General Vespasian. He believes that he'll be able to convince them not to destroy Jerusalem, or to sort of negotiate something. Exactly what the zealots don't want to do. The zealots want to go out and fight, and Rabbi Yochanan wants to try to figure out a way to resolve this without an all-out war. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai manages a way, and this is a longer part, how they fake his death, and they get him to be taken out in a coffin that everyone assumes is a coffin with the dead Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, but he's actually alive inside the coffin. They sneak him out, and he's able to go and have an audience with Vespasian, who at that time is the general, but he's about to become the king. And there's a little conversation that happens there. But part number 5 is this conversation that happens between Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and Vespasian, presently the general, soon to be the emperor of Rome.
Can I ask something, Rabbi? I'm just going back to the source about the Romans, the sacrifice.
Yeah.
Was the point there that because they didn't offer the sacrifice, they were seen as disloyal to the government?
either that they were disloyal to the government or that they had maybe intentions to rebel against them.
Oh,
Something along those lines.
Okay.
I don't know. Something that ticked off the Romans, that's for sure.
It's certainly an
Well, I
insult.
think it was also an insult to them. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah. Right. It seems like they're trying to instigate something. Like, why don't you just offer a sacrifice? Like, it's not. There are rules about offering sacrifices of non-Jews. Temple, they did that often. That was not an uncommon thing. All of a sudden, you're not going to accept ours. Like, what are you trying to start here? But that wasn't the Romans' response. The Romans' response wasn't, what are you trying to start here? The Romans' response is, you've started something. We're going to end it. Yeah.
Or the opposite of kind of the Egyptians and our slaughtering of whatever, kids, sheep or something that, they were considered holy.
Right. Right. Yeah. This was considered this would have been a good thing for them to offer this. It wouldn't have been like slaughtering their God on our altar. This would be like offering a gift to our God on their behalf would be like a way to be pluralistic. We're working together. We're all on the same team. We're all working together. Could be a very nice thing. And the Romans, the Jews, not that they were against that idea, but just they felt that this sacrifice couldn't be given. They'd give anything else, but not this sacrifice. The Romans couldn't understand that there was something wrong with the sacrifice. They took it very personally. All right. The fifth and final part is the conversation between Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and Vespasian. Someone want to read this for us? The last source that we'll talk about before we go back and try to tie everything together.
Okay, I'll do it.
Thanks, Mark.
When Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai reached there, that is the Roman camp, he said, "Greetings to you, the king. Greetings to you, the king."
And then there's this dialogue back and forth as Vespasian says, "I'm not the king. I'm the emperor. I'm not the emperor. I'm just a general." And then Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, "Well, you're about to be the emperor." And then lo and behold, someone comes into Vespasian and says, "Oh, the emperor has died. You're the new emperor." And so Vespasian says, "Oh, look at that, Rabbi Yochanan. You were right. I guess I am going to be the emperor. I'll give you anything you want." All right. Okay. So keep going.
Vespasian then said to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, "I will be going to Rome, and I will send someone else in my place to continue besieging the city and waging war against it. But before I leave, ask something of me that I can give you." Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him, "Give me Yavna and its sages, and do not destroy it, and spare the dynasty of Rabbi Gamliel, and do not kill them as if they were rebels. And lastly, give me doctors to heal Rabbi Tzadok." Rav Yosef read the following verse about him, and some say that it was Rabbi Akiva who applied the verse to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. "I am the Lord, who turns wise men backward and makes their knowledge foolish," as he should have said to him to leave the Jews alone this time.
Right. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is granted a wish from Vespasian. He says, "I'll grant what do you want?" And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, "Don't destroy the city of Yavna that has all of these rabbis in it. Don't destroy don't kill Rabban Gamliel and save that dynasty. And then give me doctors till Rabbi Tzadok." And Rav Yosef, or maybe it's Rabbi Akiva, are looking at this and saying, is he nuts? He should have asked for the Jews to be spared. What was he doing here? Why would he choose? Okay, it's nice. Yavna, the city of rabbis, the doctor for Rabbi Tzadok, Rabban Gamliel, those are all great. But wouldn't it have been so much better had he said, "My request is that you leave us alone, just for now." So that's what they're upset about. They're not upset. They're just like confused. Like, this was foolish. So they sort of pin it on God. They say, well, this is what the book of Isaiah describes God as being one who turns wise men backward. Right? This is an instance of God making Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai say something very stupid, very foolish.
Right.
Yeah, Moralea. Or did you just raise your hand?
No.
Oh, sorry, Mark Bernstein.
Just a question. Is this also, this is from the Gittin source, is it referring back to the initial verse saying that it's not, again, we're not dealing with sinat chinam, we're talking about people who don't take responsibility or don't see the outcome of their actions.
Well, we'll get there. But this is in the same series. There's not been a break in the narrative. It started with Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. It's going to do that. It's been going on. So we skipped maybe 2 sections. the story of how the siege started, and then the first part of the conversation between Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and Vespasian. But other than that, this has been a straight, there's no break in the story. There's no, here's another story. This has been telling a part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4 in series. We'll come back to that exact point.
And just in terms of Roman history, if I'm not mistaken, so Nero committed suicide. He sends Vespasian off to conquer, to put down the rebellion in Judea. He commits suicide in Rome. Vespasian then comes back and then he says, here in our source it said Vespasian said, I'm going to send somebody else. It's actually his son Titus who he sends that actually carries out the destruction of Jerusalem.
Yeah, and that's what's going to happen after this. Then there's a little bit of a discussion about what exactly Rabbi Tzadok was sick with, that he needed doctors, and then it starts telling about Titus destroying the temple. Yeah, and then the Arch of Titus, which is not in the Talmud, but it's in Italy. Okay, and then so the last part here. Why didn't Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai make this request? Meaning the Gemara here is quoting Rabbi Yosef or Rabbi Akiva saying that this was a mistake. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai didn't say the right thing. He should have requested more, and he didn't. And the answer, why didn't Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai make this request? He maintained that Vespasian might not do that much for him, and there would not even be a small amount of salvation. Therefore, he made only a modest request in the hope that he would receive at least that much, right? The Hebrew expression, tafasta merubelo tafasta, you try to grab too much, you grab nothing. Thought that if Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai made a request, leave us alone, Vespasian would have said, what are you, crazy? No, done, get out of here, and he wouldn't have given anything.
Or in other words, maybe he thought Jerusalem was already a lost cause.
Yeah, or maybe, there was no chance of saving Jerusalem. Okay, so with all this, what are the, I'll pose this. I have my own thoughts that are based a lot on a teacher of mine, Rabbi Jeremy Weider from Yeshiva University. But how do we, what is the tzad hashaveh? Right? What is the similarity? What is the theme that runs through part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, and part 5? Why are these all tied here together? And then we'll come back to how does this relate to what Rabbi Yochanan said at the very beginning about the person who is fearful always? And then how are all these parts related to the idea of sinat chinam? Right, so first we'll start with how are all of these stories tied together? What is a similarity? What is a theme that comes up in each of these stories? I think we've touched on a lot of these points already. Yeah, Mark.
I think if we're again reading it according to the Gittin and not bringing in Eicha Rabbah, it's the whole idea of hardening one's heart.
What do you mean by hardening one's heart?
It's not sinat chinam. It's not wanton hatred. It's not seeing the cost, the human cost of, or the consequences of people's actions. So Zechariah, was a halachist, strict halachist, but he wasn't thinking about actually what would happen. And who is it here? Rabbi Yochanan also, not Rabbi Yochanan, where are we up to? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, right.
Yeah,
Again, that he didn't really, he hardened his heart. He was thinking about the sages and not the people of Jerusalem. I don't know, because he was concerned about continuing the rabbinic dynasties and the Mishnah, whatever, and wasn't really thinking about the Jewish people. I don't know.
Yeah, being very small-minded and parochial about everything.
So I think an element of this, you have in that first source, you have Rabbi, or in the first source, either looking at source number 3 with Eicha Rabbah about how Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkola said, "I'm not going to say anything," or maybe even the host in Bar Kamsa having this conversation. There was a failure to realize, to think big picture here. I mean, clearly, if Bar Kamsa was able to have such an easy access to the emperor, you could go to the emperor and say, "Hey, the Jews are conspiring against you." he must have been somewhat of a connected person. No one at the banquet realized that we're talking to someone who has connections to Rome. Should we be careful, who already is probably not happy with us, should we be careful about how we're having these conversations, how we're treating him? Part number two, you have, we talk Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkolas is someone who's not thinking big picture. The reality is that when the Romans hear that we're not going to offer this sacrifice, how are they going to react to this? What is the end result? What are the consequences of this action? I think the story of Nero is as an opposite of that. Here's Nero who's looking at it, who says, I realize what the consequences of my actions are going to be. I'm going to destroy Jerusalem, then I'm going to be blamed for this. I see the reaction, the consequences of what I'm going to do. I see the big picture here. I don't want any part in this. And he leaves. You have Marta Bat Baitus, who's someone who completely doesn't see the reaction. Her or her servant, no one's thinking about the big picture. He's just thinking, I have to get fine flour. There's no fine flour. What do I do? Oh, you have to get, she doesn't say, you idiot, just get anything. She says, oh, there's no fine flour? Okay, so get the raw flour, get this, get that. Like, no one in this story is thinking about the consequences, about like big picture, what we need to get here. And I think the idea of the end here, there's a conversation between, well, how does Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai? Is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai thinking big picture or not? Rav Yosef and Rabbi Akiva think he's not thinking big picture. He doesn't know what he's doing. The end of the Gemara, I think, is saying, no, he was thinking big picture, and he was thinking, this is the best we can get, so I'm going to get the best I can get. He is thinking big picture. But the story, all these stories here are about people who are not thinking through to the consequences of what they're going to do, not thinking of the reaction. What's the result of this action? At least that's the way I think, that's the way my rabbi had sort of presented this, which I think is very compelling. We skipped over the thing about the zealots destroying all the stores of food, but that also, like, they thought only about, okay, if we destroy all the food, everyone will rebel, but they didn't really think about, will that actually work? What'll be the results of that? Either everyone dies in the rebellion or everyone dies of famine. Like, is this really a well thought out idea? But there was a lot of thinking about what I'm going to do right now, and not a lot of thinking about the consequences or the big picture of what like will actually be beneficial. And with all of that,
right.
though, now the Talmud here believes it's telling a story about Sinat Chinam, right? I think, assuming that Yoma and Gittin are going together, and that Yoma is saying the second time it was destroyed because of Sinat Chinam, and here's an instance of Sinat Chinam. So it thinks it's telling a story, lessons about Sinat Chinam. And so a question that we can, it's almost 1 o'clock, I'll leave you with is, how is this also a story of Sinat Chinam? How is the idea of not thinking big picture, about thinking very narrowly, about thinking of what I have in front of me right now, or how I'm feeling right now, and what I want to do right now, is actually a failure of a sin of Sinat Chinam? That maybe what Sinat Chinam means is that I'm failing to see the bigger picture in everything. And maybe what Sinat Chinam is this someone who's, as again, what Rabbi Yochanan says, someone who hardens his heart shall fall into mischief, someone who always fears always, someone who realizes, I'm upset, someone has wronged me in some way. Mm-hmm. It's very comfortable for me to say, I'm going to lose it, I'm going to get angry, I'm going to do this, that, and the other thing. And a failure to actually think, number one, big picture, what actually might be going on here? Like, why might this have happened? Was this really some targeted personal ad hominem attack against me? Or was this a little bit of a miscommunication or a misunderstanding? And even if it wasn't a miscommunication, meaning even if it was a totally intentionally cruel and mean and spiteful act, what action am I going to do that's going to actually have an end result that's positive or successful in any way? I have a good friend of mine is he plays ice hockey for fun. He was telling me, I remember this story sticks with me, but he told me this story years ago. He was playing like pickup ice hockey, and someone, checked him very hard, very dangerously into the boards. He almost could have really hurt himself. Like, my friend Yair could have been hurt by this guy. And my friend Yair was like, I should have told him that I was going to tell this story and use his name. So his name's not Yair. His name is Joe. We'll say his name. So Joe was checked into the boards and was very hurt, like physically. And he was really upset. And he felt that he was like, had righteous indignation against this guy who really could have done something very unsafe. I remember Yair was trying to figure out, like, what am I going to do? Like, I could go up to him, tear off his jersey, tear off his pads, and start punching him in the face, but what is that going to result in? And he's going to attack me, I'm going to attack him, everyone's going to get into a big fight, and like more people are going to get hurt. Like, will anything positive actually come from this? Is there a way to resolve this or respond to this in a way that's makes more sense than my immediate gut reaction? And so I think there's something to this idea of sinat chinam, this baseless hatred, is not being like, there's no excuse for the hatred, because we always think that we're justified in the feelings that we feel. But I wonder if maybe something that the Gemara here, Masechet Gittin, is trying to communicate to us is maybe these ideas of sinat chinam are about realizing the consequences, like realizing the cost of the sinah, of the hatred that we have. And it's not going to have no cost. There are going to be repercussions. There's going to be a response, reaction to it, and thinking it through. Nero was able to think it through and say, is this going to be worth it? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was not sure, is this worth it or not, and ended up making a decision that he thought was worth it. And I think it's clear from the end there that sometimes there's what to discuss. Was it worth it or not? But at least Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was willing to think along those lines. It wasn't just a gut reaction saying, this is what I'm going to do. He was trying to think about what is the right appropriate response here. I think as we're getting ready for Tisha B'Av and we're thinking about how to become better people and how to be, what is the sinat chinam, what is the reason that the temple was destroyed, and how do we rectify that in some way in our lives, I think maybe the Gemara here in Masechet Gittin is trying to tell us one thing we can do is to sort of slow it down, pump the brakes a little bit, and to think, what are the consequences of the actions that I'm about to take? What's going to be the result of this? Will it yield something that's positive and effective and good? Or will it just yield to more and more destruction, as we see here with Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, that it ultimately just unraveled into the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash? Some things to think about as we're here in the almost beginning the 9 days of Av. Thank you guys all for